Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I want to warmly welcome you to today's online training regarding our just released and brand new Embedded Wizard version 10.0. I'm glad you're here. Some of you may already know my voice, at least, from our Masterclass Monday sessions, which we held during the summer. And now, my name is Kristin. I want to welcome you from the marketing side to this very special webinar today. Our head of product, Manuel Melic, will guide you through today's session. And please don't hesitate. If you have any questions, put them in the chat window. At the end, we will select them and answer them. And just in case, if we don't come back to your answer, be sure we will anyways answer it then later on. Okay, and now I want to already hand over to Manuel. And the stage is yours, Manuel.
Thank you very much, Christine, for this pleasant introduction. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our attendees worldwide. As Christine already said, my name is Manuel. I'm responsible for our UI solution Embedded Wizard here at Chora System. And today I'm very proud to give you a brief update what new functionalities we have added to our latest release, Embedded Wizard 10.0. In fact, we can, more or less group the additional stuff that we added in 3 categories. First of all, we have done a lot of usability improvements inside our studio that I'd like to show you later on. Next to that, we have also improved a lot of our own programming language, Chora. I think most of you already know how Chora is dealing and how to deal with that. So I think there are some things that you might have been desired and wished for a long time that have now been added. So please be very open for this new functionality. And finally, for all those professional users and customers that we have, we also did some modification in how to use the studio license, and this implies a new digital license key mechanism, and I give you a brief overview how this is. As Christine said, we will also answer your questions later on after I showed you these 3 improvements. So please raise your question during my time now, and we will get back to that later on. So let's get started. And of course, the first thing that I like to do is just to start the Embedded Wizard Studio with a new version 10. For that, I'm just simply opening a already existing project, an example that is deployed in every studio installation, and to show you what can be done. The first thing inside the studio improvements that you will recognize is that there's now the possibility to scroll the entire view of the composer now also in negative direction. As you see, the scroll bars here are now positioned to the middle, and what's happening when I'm just scrolling above and scrolling to the left side, that you can also now position your items to the left or to the topmost position of the anchor point of position 00. So this is new. Of course, now I'm using the mouse to scroll, the mouse wheel to scroll in the proper Y direction, whereas I'm holding now the shift key and using the scroll wheel as well to scroll in the X direction, and this gives you nice functionality also now to position your views in any direction of the currently selected screen. So if you want to position that in the middle of the screen, you can do that. However, usually, and this is historically related, usually we expect that here on the top left corner that the position 00 is. If you want to go back now, so for example, if you have been scrolled to any direction in that way and in that way, and you need to find your way back home, it's very easy, just pressing here the button which says scroll to origin, and as you see, there's also now a shortcut, which means pressing Ctrl D gives you or brings you back to the home position in 00, so that the top left corner is now positioned at that position. Another key which will also work, so for example, if you're anywhere in the screen, is now pressing on your home button on your keyboard. So this is something that I'm now doing, pressing now the home button, and you see it's going back to the origin as well. So this is one of the significant changes when you're dealing with the view inside the composer. However, what also has been added inside the composer is when dealing with the views. Just for example, selecting now this gauge here, and what's happening when I now remove that to the outside of the view, then and deselecting that, then you see that the view is still made visible with this wireframe. This is a new outline view, and for example, if you have now a list, or if you have an outline view which groups several different groups inside one view, then you can easily find them. With the previous version of Embedded Wizard, these were not made visible, so they were completely empty, and the only method that could be how to find that view back was searching inside the inspector, either by selecting that directly or by searching that here in the search window. So this has been changed. And this helps also now to identify different views. Of course, it's also possible if this is somehow partially viewed, then inside the visible canvas it is of course made visible, it is rendered, whereas outside the view it is made visible with this wireframe. If you have a very complex GUI setup and the current view is very complex and you want to identify which different aspects are used or which different views are now used inside my view, you can also now enable the outline view entirely for the entire view by just pressing now Ctrl E on the keyboard or by pressing that button there. And then you see, okay, these are all the views that belongs now to my UI. This can be switched on and switched off also by pressing now Ctrl E on my keyboard. You can then also easily identify what new what views are lurking around inside your whole ecosystem. Another thing, for example, by now enabling this control view, is that you see that these views, which is in real view the label here, voltage plus the knob, that these overlay at some position. And it could also be that you have other views that are more brought to into the Z ordering, that these are not now identified. So the volume lies now behind the rotary knob there, and it was very difficult in the past to really select that view. Now when I'm now pressing my mouse with the left mouse button on that view, it's not easy to really grab that volume. Now I got it because it is a little bit more bigger, like in the other direction. Now for the current knob or the label, this can be easily selected. But if you have some views which are stacked, then it's not so easy to get that or to select that in a proper way. So it's, you see, sometimes the background is selected when I'm pressing the left mouse button or the knob itself. However, when I'm now holding down my shift key on my keyboard, so the shift key is now pressed, and I'm pressing now the right mouse button, then you get some nice overlay on top, which gives you all different views that are currently positioned within my current position of the mouse. So that means in that case I have the background, I have my label voltage, and I have my rotary knob voltage. And by I said, holding down the shift key plus the right mouse key brings up this pop-up window, and then you can easily select, okay, I want to get exactly that label voltage there, and then you have it, and then you can remove that accordingly. So this is also a very nice functionality that has been added. When just removing this a little bit, something which is also new, of course, is when you, for example, drag and drop an element, for example, that view here, then you see that there are new, let's say handles, or these handles here at the edges of that view, and those can now be used to resize the view. In the past, it was only possible to use the corners here. Now you can also drag and drop elements inside that view. Another functionality which is essential when resizing is used, that is, for example, you want to maintain the aspect ratio of a view. So now you have a not a square one, you have a rectangle view of this rectangle, and by holding down now the control key on my keyboard, so I'm now pressing the control key, that you see that the aspect ratio of my screen is still the same. Another functionality which is there when resizing the views is by pressing the Alt key on my keyboard, which moves the origin of where to make the resizement into the middle of the screen. So this is something which is pretty well known from design tools like Photoshop, for example, where resizing views on related to the dedicated aspect ratio as well to a dedicated origin can be it has now been added. So pressing now the control key, pressing the alt key on your keyboard changes the resizement and keeping the aspect ratio and moves the center of the effect of the resizing transition into the middle. Just removing that, I just said there are the new handles. Something that just came in my mind is, for example, and this was very annoying in the past, for example, if you have a simple touch handler, there were 4 different points, and as you see in the past, it was also necessary to make a rectangle view by handling all these 4 views. Just removing that, adding that again. However, when you're now selecting the corners here, the handles not on the corner, sorry, on the edges, it's a little bit more easier to rotate and not rotate, to resize that. When having some not squared aligned view, for example, this edge here also gives us new functionality when removing the view along this this handle here, and this gives you a little bit more flexibility when using these new added grips or handles. As you probably might already have recognized, there is no functionality now to add or to align a view to a dedicated grid. The grid that have been removed, so grids with 2x2 or 4x4, 5x5, 10x10, etc. Grid alignments, this has been removed for the canvas. Why? Because we added a new functionality, and as I said, you just have recognized that, is the alignment to dedicated other views. And when I'm now holding down this view, then you see, for example, that this newly added simple touch handler aligns to the middle of the current knob as well as the top line of the power supply label, which is now located on the bottom right corner. And this magnetic mode gives us now the flexibility, or especially you, to align views to already existing objects. This can be elements lurking around, other elements, and it gives you a flexibility really to snap in to already existing views, for example. I have to be honest with you, this automatic and magnetic alignment is something which someone likes, and there are someone out there who do not like that. If that is too annoying, then you can simply disable that. This can be done in a permanent way, so that means by disabling that here with the magnetic snap mode, by pressing that button here, or by pressing Ctrl G on your keyboard. And as you see, this has been now permanently disabled. However, if you want to have that new functionality, just removing that, adding some simple views, for example, again, if you want to have that, so just aligning now 2 ones, you want to enable that temporarily, you can then simply press and hold the shift key on your keyboard. So this is what I'm now doing, press and hold the shift key, and then by selecting that, then this magnetic mode gets enabled temporarily. So selecting that, holding now the shift key, and then you see the magnetic mode is there. When I'm not holding that anymore, then it can be arranged freely. So this is the functionality. Of course, on the other side, when this magnetic mode is enabled, so just now enable that, adding that, so now you see that it's now snapping automatically. You can also disable it temporarily by now holding the shift key. Okay, so this can also be done very easily in order to get rid of that if you want to use that. So this is how to do that. Next to that magnetic element, the magnetic snap mode, we have also added the functionality now to do a alignment and distribution of views as required. For example, now press selecting those two gauges there, and then you see that here inside the toolbar, edit icons are now shown. So for example, I want to align them on topmost, and you see just a couple of pixels, this gauge has been moved on top. So for example, doing this again with a little bit more impact, then you see that you can now align that accordingly. All these elements there should be aligned horizontally, selecting those, adding that, and then these are now aligned. And I think because that image here is a little more bigger, then you see that every one of these selected items are now aligned in a proper way. Next to that alignment, maybe horizontally, maybe vertically, on the left side, on the right side, on the center, there's also the functionality now to distribute elements according to either to make them in equal space or to keep equal space in between for that selected view. For example, by pressing now or selecting those elements and changing that would give you that every middle position of that selected view is now distributed in a proper way, or by selecting that one would change a little bit depending on the view. If you have views with different sizes, this makes more sense than this simple example, but it gives you a little bit more the feeling how to distribute now views. And this enables you really to set up views to a dedicated to your custom grid more easily. You select one view and then you add new elements and align that, distribute that, and then it's there. So this is also a very nice functionality inside Embedded Wizard. So this would be the most important features that are shown when it comes to the studio, to the composer, to the editor itself. Next to that, we have also done a couple of modifications and improvements inside our own programming language, Chora. What are those? So, for example, therefore I need an editor, and to have that there is already I think it's just a very simple slot mechanism to handle the keyboard handling. I'm just now hooking in and just typing there the new functionalities that are available. So first of all, I'd like to express that there are a bunch of new math functionalities built in. For example, now pressing Control and the space key and typing in math, and then you see that, for example, there is a new logarithmic, which is natural logarithmic is available, or for example, a new operation on a length to a dedicated x and y values, which would say, okay, trace the math lengths, for example, with 2.0 to 1.0. Just to give you a brief idea, starting the prototyper. By the way, the prototyper now stays on top all the time. So when you're now dragging your item inside the editor, the prototyper will not disappear. It stays there because it still belongs to that, and you can edit inside the editor again without removing the prototyper into the background and not finding that anymore. So what's going on when I'm now pressing the key here inside the view? Then you see that I get some output which says trace 2.3, which is the length of this vector. Now you might ask, why is that 2? Well, in fact, when doing the operation of the length of that 2D vector, then the theorem of Pythagoras is being taken into account. So that means both values are calculated by the Pythagoras theorem, and which results then in 2 to the 3, and it's not only the distance. So please keep that in mind. Nevertheless, next to that math length, there are other functionalities built in. So for example, math tangents, for example, was not there. And so we added there a lot of new functionalities inside the Chora menu. Next to these math functionalities and additional float operations, which has been improved, something which was asked quite a couple of times was this impression for variables, for example. Let's say integer 32 with initialized value of 0, and this should be incremented. In the past, it was necessary to write something like to write something like this, so a equals a plus 1. However, this is not needed anymore. Now we have the plus plus operator, of course. Next to the plus plus operator, there's of course the minus minus as well, and when I now trace the a, then it should be 0 again. Now I'm pressing the button which says okay, trace 0, and here we go. So this is I think something which has been required a couple of times, and this is now available. Next to that, increment decrement operators, there is also the so-called compound operator been added. So for example, let's say integer 32 goes to a, and integer 32b goes to also to let's say to 1, and that means a plus equals b, which would now result, just starting the prototype again, to 1. And so you see it's not necessary to do this as it was before. So this was before, and so you can be more efficient when coding. So this would be the compound operator. Next to the operators, something which is also new, for example, is the so-called ternary condition operator, but this is something similar to the magnetic snap mode that has been added. There are a lot of people who love that operator, and there are a lot of people who dislike that functionality. I just want to show you how it works. In fact, let's say a equals 1, that means we have, let's say this is 1, whereas otherwise it is not 1. Just, sorry, a typo. A very small example, just reloading the prototyper, pressing now a key, and says, oh, it's not 1 as is. So why is this not 1? Of course, we added first 0 to 1, which is 1, and then added 1 in addition. So it means a is actually 2, just to be sure that this works as expected. So reloading the prototyper, pressing now the key, which gives me now a 1, of course. So this is for the ternary condition operator, which adds that. So what else is there? Let's remove that, for example, and say inside, for example, while loops, while true, trace something inside loop, comma a, and then we have a plus plus, and then at the end, what is now new is the break operation. This is new, and of course, if there's a break, then continue is also available. This is now for while loops, for example, for loops, do while loops. So break and the continue is now available, which was not there in the past. Next to these things in the while loop, we have also added new functionality in the switch cases. So let's, for example, take care about the A and say case 1 trace 1, case 2 trace not 1, and then what is new, we have the so-called fall through statement. It's the opposite of the classical break, so that means in that way, we could also have something like this. Hold on. Which would say, not a semicolon here, just go to curly braces, of course. So, which would say, okay, if that A goes to 1 or it's to 2, then fall through, and then the default is 1. So it's not break automatically, which is default behavior. Yeah, you can now identify, okay, that the current switch case is now gone through all the different states. And for example, this one goes to 1 when I say, okay, A plus plus, starting again, and then it says not 1. So this is a new functionality inside the switch statement. Something which is also new, for example, if you have the slot, and you know the slot can be, or the initiator of the slot can be referred by the sender. For example, I'm now tracing the sender who have now issued the signal to that slot. So just starting that would give me now the ID of my key handler, and something which is now new in 10.0, that you can, for example, check if the sender equals or is not null. So this was in previous version, and now you can explicitly say, okay, if the sender is valid or if not, the sender object is valid. So the automatic check regarding the value of the object, and this goes also for integer, where really the value of the integer value is processed. So that means 0 belongs to the same as, or goes to the same interpretation as an object which has a null reference, and so you can really be more efficient when coding. Last but not least, when going to the Chora improvements, something that I like to mention is now the support of variable integer 64. This is also new, so maybe a signed or an unsigned integer, and the functionality to deal with those big values has been added in the new version. And this now leads me also to the changes that you will find inside the Mosaic library. And something, for example, which is really now influenced by this integer 64 is that, for example, the core time object, time equals new core time, that now the internal processing of time values are now all in 64 based. So this is a new functionality based on the new functionality of Chora inside Mosaic. Something which is also new in Mosaic is a functionality which allows you to remove all objects from a group. So that means for the group where all nested other views belong to, was required to iterate through all those previously, and now there is the function remove all, which would say, okay, for the slot method, we're just now removing that. I'm pressing now the key, which simply removes now all views that have been added inside the composer statically, for example. So this is all a new functionality inside Mosaic. When looking at Mosaic itself, something which is also new is the identification of so-called internal members. It was sometimes, or we received sometimes from customer support cases, the feeling that internal members which belong to Mosaic itself are overwritten or are used, which are not intended to do that. And really to identify thus that this is now an internal member of the Mosaic, you will find those now inside the inspector in italics and in light gray. This is for the inspector, and when selecting, for example, this onset cursor sequel delay, I don't know what this is doing, but this belongs to the Mosaic. It says, okay, is an internal Mosaic member, and the member is not intended to be used within your own implementation. So please be careful. Whereas the classical drive multi-touch hitting functionality, this can be used, of course, and this is now indicated. You can see, okay, there are different internal members and slot methods, etc., which are not intended to be used. And of course, this is now also shown inside the browser window. For example, you see the core dialog context belongs to Mosaic. It's not intended to be used by your project. It's an internal member, and please be careful of that. So it's another functionality. Something which is also new inside the Mosaic is the dealing of font resources. Font resources means when you now add a new font resource, for example, then you will identify a new member, a new attribute called hate mode. The hate mode is now set to default to popular. What does popular mean? When you are dealing with external tools, like for example Adobe Photoshop, then the designer usually says, okay, a dedicated font needs to have that font height in pixels, and when they're selecting popular, then you can directly type in the new font height that should be used for that project. So that means popular belongs to the classical usage of other tools, so like Photoshop, Designer, whatsoever. If you want to be compatible with previous one, you just say, okay, hate mode goes to compatible, which is the old method of dealing with the font sizes, and this is something which has been added, so you can now use the given font height directly from your given design, for example by Photoshop. So this is for the font resource. Another thing, now this was for the Mosaic. Something that I'd like now also to mention is, for example, in the platform package. Therefore, I'm just now opening the document system, the knowledge base of Embedded Wizard, go to the release notes, and something which is just, so these are all of them. So if you have any questions, or if this was not too fast, there everything is documented as well. For example, the compound assignment operator, etc. Also the fall through is mentioned there, and there are a lot of things added. And last but not least, something I'd like to mention is a new functionality inside the platform package, which is the EW register flash area reader. So this is new, and what can you do with that? In fact, when you have now bitmap resources, for example, and they are stored now on a flash device, on a NAND flash device, which cannot be mapped directly into the CPU address space of your microcontroller, for example, then you can register a dedicated callback functionality like that one. So this would be the type cast for that callback functionality, which would allow you to define a reader functionality in order to load binary data now into from a serial attached device, like NAND flash or SD card, and use that to load those bitmap binary data now into the GUI. This functionality is then used if you, as said, do not have stored your bitmap resources, for example, in a NOR flash device or directly accessible device, if it is mapped to NAND flash, for example. However, please keep in mind that it is also required to allocate the buffers. At a certain point in time, we need to have a direct access to the given bitmap, for example, and so you need to allocate that in a way. Just one thing that is now missing is a proper example. We are actually working on examples to illustrate that functionality, so this will be added soon. So just stay tuned and you get informed about this new functionality, how to use that. But this is something which is a nice feature and a nice extension. Now just going back to the release notes, something that I hadn't mentioned at all is something which we put on top. Of course, this one belongs to most of your or of you when you are dealing also with older versions and not with the new one. So what does this new license management system imply? In fact, as you probably know, until version 9.30, so the previous version, the commercial edition, the professional edition of Embedded Wizard relies on the USB dongle. The USB dongle has been removed entirely from the system, and we migrated to a new licensing mechanism. The new licensing mechanism is based on a network license, so that means you will get now from us, when you're purchasing a new license or upgrade, a proper license key, and with that license key, Embedded Wizard verifies if your license is valid, if you are allowed to work with that in a proper way. That gives a couple of another couple of huge benefits. So, for example, if you are losing the USB dongle, or if it's broken, then you are not not stopped with your work. You can move on with your further work because now it's on your network license. However, that implies that this license is checked regularly, and this is done through internet. Nevertheless, this new mechanism with the network licensing mechanism results, in fact, with three different license models. The successor of the USB dongle is the so-called node-locked license, which says this license is locked to your PC. It cannot be removed from that PC and migrated easily to another. You can do that, but you are not allowed to do this regularly, of course. So no worries if your PC is broken. Then you can, of course, change that and transfer your license from one PC to another. So this is foreseen, of course, but not as often as it would be required if you, for example, changing your PC very often. For example, when you work from home and you have another PC, or if you have a laptop, a notebook, and you want to use now Embedded Wizard on the laptop, and if you have a regular desktop PC and you want to easily migrate from one PC to another, then this node lock is not a proper license for you. In fact, you would then need to, or a better solution would be the so-called single user floating license, which is a floating license, as the name implies, and this lets you easily transfer a license from one PC to another. As soon as your engineering team and development team gets bigger, so usually more than 2-3 engineers working in parallel with Embedded Wizard, then even that single user floating license is not the best choice, because it is relies on one single user, hence the name single user floating. So if you want to have some pool of licenses used by different engineers globally, all over the world, then the so-called multi-user floating license would be the best choice. Of course, floating and so the multi-user floating and the single-user floating, those costs more than the classical node-locked, but from my point of view, it's still a reasonable price. If you're interested in that, just drop us a note, and we can provide you with a dedicated offer, and so you can then migrate from a node-locked version, which, as said, is the successor of the USB dongle version, and then you can migrate from that one to the single user floating or the multi-user floating. Something what I also mentioned here in the release notes, as of now, or with the previous version, we did not allow to run Embedded Wizard inside a classical terminal server environment, which is then used by these RDS or remote desktop services, or the RDP, remote desktop protocol. With the floating licenses, this has been enabled, so you can now use also this kind of host sharing mechanism with Embedded Wizard. But as said, this one would require that floating that you have a proper floating license purchased. So this is just a very brief overview about the new functionalities. As said, please have a look at the release notes, read it through. There are tons of new functionalities which I hadn't mentioned right now. Yeah, it's just too many. Just scrolling down, if I missed something, yeah. So alignment is there. Mentioned that. Yeah, for example, also code editor. The code editor per default enables the virtual space, and this can now be disabled. So if you do not like that, just what is this virtual space, you're here in the editor, and you can, for example, look at there. You can select the cursor to that position, then you can type in, for example. If you do not want to use that, then you can just say go to the extras menu and just disable this virtual spacing. So that means when I now press in the button, then it moves back in a proper way. So this is, for example, available inside the new version as well. So this is for the code editor. We had additionals in the assistant window, for example. Also reference to any data types are now shown. We have addition to float functionalities. We have addition to math and float operations. I already mentioned that. We have the compound assignment. We have chained assignment is now also working. Just forgot that, sorry. The ternary condition operator is there. We had that break and continue. We had that fall through. Something also interesting is that now all local variables and local arrays are automatically pre-initialized with 0 values. You see what I have now done when I'm typing in. So that means for var int 3016a equals 0. This is something that I did all the time because I learned that to use. However, this is not needed anymore. So you can simply say var int 16a, and that is now pre-initialized with 0. So this is also new. Type conversions have been added. We had that to check about the value of an object, for example, or an integer, or even for a string, for an empty string in that case. So this is there. 64-bit is mentioned. We have core time mentioned. This belongs to the to constructors and destructors. We had Mosaic improvements. We had font resources set for the font height mode, that this has been added and improved, and tons of other improvements like that one I mentioned before for the EW register flash error reader. Another thing is when using intrinsic modules, which is an advanced topic, you can now change the behavior when loading that. Don't load those because those can also be buggy, or you do not know where they come from. So you can just say don't load that only once, load always, or just have a look at that and where does it come from. So this gives you a little bit more easier handling about how to deal with intrinsic modules. By the way, intrinsic modules are of course also documented how to do that. So just going back to the presentation, thanks for that. And now I'd like to ask Christine if there are any questions popped in the meantime. And are there any, Christine?
I already have a first one for you. There's an attendee who wants to know, will the new license mechanism work without internet access?
Yeah, so will the new licensing work without any internet access? In fact, what I just said, no. Embedded Wizard now requires a proper internet connection to validate the license. This is essential, so it's not only required when adding the license key, so this is not the case. It is required to have a permanent connection to the internet, but please don't be afraid. There's no personal data transmitted, no worries on that. It's only a very couple of bytes, I think something about 10 to 20 kilobytes, something like that, is transferred, so very less all over the day. So just very, very small information is transmitted to our servers in order to verify the internet connection, to verify the not internet connection, sorry, to verify the license key, and yeah, so this is a requirement. On the other hand, you are not able to use Embedded Wizard without a internet connection, because we put all the documentation online. So you need to have an internet connection, and it's all based on web services and web technologies. So you do not make a dedicated port into your firewall. It's just plain HTTP requests that popping in. Of course, it is secured, but it's not something very special. So usually not a big deal. And yeah, I said engineers need to have a proper internet access in order to deal with embedded wizard right now. And so we decided, as we're living in year 2020, internet is mandatory, and otherwise you cannot use that. Yeah, so this is the case.
Another question is, are there any new examples included, Manuel?
Oh, are there any new examples? Good question. Yes, there are. What I'm just now doing is open the example window. Something which is new, as far as I remember, is the dashboard demo. So the dashboard demo is more dedicated for automotive customers, of course, but it's a very nice functional or built-in functionalities shown, which are using the vector graphics. For example, that these lines and these decorators, as well as the gauges, etc., and of course the map, these are all based on vector graphics. So you can, for example, showing another view, so you can get inspired how the vector graphics are used inside the UI, and this is there. So very nice demo, as I think, and yeah, so this gives you an idea how vector graphics are used, and a little bit more sophisticated demo. So this is a new demo. Let me just double check, and I think another one is there, which is the so-called smart thermostat demo. The smart thermostat, we had that already put on the website, but yeah, sorry for that. It was not included inside Embedded Wizard, so we had a couple of requests. Can you please provide that? Of course we can. So this is a thermostat application which yeah, allows you to use the built-in widgets in order to yeah, build up those UI controls, like this rotary gauge here, for example, this rotary knob, which has another yeah, transition. So for example, when you're doing this in more steps, it's not a 1-to-1, it's I think 1-to-2, something like this, in order to have a more sophisticated one, different views, etc. So this is there, can be used for you for the references, and allows you to get known how everything is done with the new widgets. I think that's for the two. Just let me double check. I think we had that one. The smart thermostat is there, of course, and that's it. Yeah, so these two demos have been added. Christine, is there any other question?
Manuel here wants to know, an attendee, if the version 10.0 is a forced update. He asks, can I, as an existing customer, continue using my previous version, for example 9.20, 9.30, even though I may be entitled for an update? And can the help desk support me in my question?
Oh, no, absolutely not. So customers are not enforced to do an update. It's an offer from us, so those customers who are entitled to use a new version, they can use that. But I said it's not required for customers to migrate to a new version, absolutely not. So they can stick for their project to older versions. Of course, something I need to address at that point in time when looking at the release notes, there are not only feature improvements and additions made, there are, as always, some bug fixed, and this is something which is something worth to get to know, and which gives you a little more feeling. And a couple of things have been added and improved and fixed. So it's not only this one that have to be kept in mind when dealing with Embedded Wizard, of course, or with any software. There are also some bug fixes. So of course, our recommendation is to go ahead with a new version, but customers are not enforced to update. They can stay on a previous version, of course. And I think a question was if we support that old version. Yes, of course. So if a customer has a problem with that version, we help that. So that's not an issue. Of course, if there are things lurking around that have already been fixed, then we say, okay, please update to the new version, and then we need to identify with the customer what problem it is. Please keep in mind, Embedded Wizard is developed entirely by ourselves, so we do not have any third-party stacks or open source components built into our tooling. So we have the full control, and if we can fix something, then we are able to fix that because it's our software with no further dependencies. And yes, so please be ensured that we will also support older versions with your project if you have that requirement.
Thanks for your answers, Manuel. Okay, so I see there are more questions dropping in. So as I said at the beginning, we will answer them one-on-one via email later. I thank you very much for attending. I hope you learned a lot about the new version today. You enjoyed our presentation, and I hope to hear you one day soon. Bye.
I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Just some further resources. Perhaps you already know the Masterclass Mondays. Perhaps just some brief update on that. So we have now put the Masterclass series onto our website as a library. So it's still there. In fact, we have now 9 classes from the fundamentals, Studio, Chora, etc., up to also more sophisticated stuff like simulation or UI architectures testing. So this is something that can be now viewed offline for your further information and to improve your embedded wizard skills. So this is there, just something to mention. Of course, demos is there. And all other things are there. So that's from my side. Thank you very much for your time, and hope to hear you soon. And thanks for your time. As said, stay healthy, and goodbye.